Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Today we're going to be doing a part 2 on last week's video. We only maybe covered about half of the content, and I'm aware I have a bad habit of starting but not finishing my responses to videos, so we're going to change, starting with this video. Lauren is going to give us a few more reasons why she thinks the FDA cannot be trusted.
I think there are some people out there who, for reasons I personally cannot fathom, just place so much trust in the government and in all of these alphabet registries that they really do believe that these people know the best and they would never ever do something that would potentially hurt people.
Although I agree that the common person without scientific knowledge would essentially be putting in faith when following the advice of experts, a lot of people don't. If you're not knowledgeable enough yourself, ask someone who is. If you can't trust the people at the FDA, ask someone who is also an expert in the field that you can trust. Just ask another scientist who doesn't work for the FDA, for example, or maybe if you have a friend who is a scientist. These are all good resources. And as a scientist myself, I can say that the FDA is being honest with their statements and they follow the science when it comes to making decisions for COVID-19. The common public should be listening to the FDA experts.
Which is really kind of funny because I feel like whether you're right wing or left wing, most of us agree that politicians can be bought off, right? That's common knowledge at this point. If you suggest that the same could be true of scientists or doctors, well, now you're going into conspiracy territory, right? As if for some reason, by virtue of them being scientists or doctors instead of politicians or lawyers, these people are like immune to financial incentives.
Okay, no one is immune to financial incentives. That's fine. But you can't just claim that and leave it open-ended, making our audience think that the corruption is at work here in the FDA without providing hard evidence. Instead of focusing on incentives, you could actually just look at the science they're promoting and judge for yourself. For example, if an organization is saying obesity is bad for your cardiovascular health, instead of going out and claiming, hey, this organization is funded by a salad company, instead you can actually investigate their claims directly. Read the scientific articles and determine for yourself how accurate the claim is. It's the same for the FDA. Why even think about their financial incentives when instead you can investigate their claims directly? And I understand that you're scientifically illiterate, which is why the only thing you can focus on are things like incentives, but at the very least you could consult another scientist outside of the FDA. You being uneducated is not an excuse to suggest dangerous information like this.
And the reason I bring this up is because not a lot of people know this, but when it comes to the FDA, quite a lot of their funding, at least half of their funding, actually comes from the companies whose products they are reviewing. Seriously, I'm not making that up. That is publicly available information, even though it doesn't really get talked a lot about. As USA Today writes, about 45% of the FDA's budget, or $2.7 billion, comes from industry user fees, according to a fact sheet released by the FDA in November 2020. The other 55%, or $3.2 billion, comes from federal funding. A further breakdown of the agency's total budget does show, depending on the department, industry fees can account for most of the funding, however. For regulatory activities involving human drugs, which account for a third of the agency's total budget, 65%, or about $656 million, is funded by industry user fees. For biologics, which includes vaccines and represents 7% of the FDA's total budget, industry fees pay about 40%, or around $337 million. I don't know how we can pretty much all agree that lobbyists and union money can buy politicians, that when it comes to the FDA being funded by the companies whose products they are reviewing, it's like, no, we can't talk about how that could potentially be a conflict of interest because no, they're scientists. They're just better people than us.
Here's what is always dishonest about people like you who are generally anti-science. You bring up something like this, don't provide hard evidence, and just leave it for the audience to think off of your claim. It's like what Fox News does all the time. Don't provide evidence whatsoever, but instead just ask questions. Ask enough questions for the viewers to have doubts in their minds. Instead, how about you give concrete evidence that FDA claims are incentivized by their source of budget? Because so far you haven't. In fact, let me actually do this for you, because if you even took the time to read a bit further, you'd get a better picture as to why the FDA accepts money from the companies they review. Okay, so these are called user fees and make up approximately 45% of the FDA's budget. User fees that other companies, such as ones trying to get their new drug or product FDA approved, pay a certain fee for this process to happen. Now, that being said, this is something that happens in pretty much any service. You pay someone to do something for you. It's not uncommon. In this case, the companies are paying the FDA in order to review their product. The FDA and the drug or device manufacturers negotiate negotiate the user fees. They also negotiate performance measures that the FDA has to meet to collect them and propose changes in FDA processes. Performance measures includes things such as how quickly the FDA responds to meeting requests, how quickly it generates correspondence, and how long it takes from submission of a new drug application until the FDA approves or refuses to approve a drug or product. So it seems that the user fees mostly affects how quickly you can get an approval or rejection rather than the decision itself. And that doesn't surprise me. The FDA has been incredibly careful when it comes to protecting their reputation. For the full approval of the Pfizer vaccine, FDA scientists hesitated because they wanted to be extra sure in order to maintain their status of a trustworthy authority. Meanwhile, scientists in the United States have already called for full FDA approval well before it actually happened, suggesting how conservative the FDA can really be. This ignorant claim that Lauren is trying to suggest is based on absolutely nothing other than the breakdown of the FDA's budget. It doesn't provide any evidence regarding incentives or what the money is for.
And in case anybody at this point thinks I'm just being paranoid or too distrustful of the FDA and their motivations, I would like to bring up for a little bit the food pyramid.
The food pyramid was not necessarily wrong. It was just too broad and uninformative. For example, it did not differentiate between whole grain and white bread. As a result, it was not easy to follow and easy to misread. Later, it was replaced by MyPlate, which is better. That being said, that wasn't a result of corruption or incentives. That was just a mistake. Scientists are experts in their field, but that doesn't mean they can't make mistakes. If you want to argue that scientific organizations are untrustworthy because they make mistakes, then that's a much more powerful argument than saying don't trust them because they're corrupted. And as you can see from the food pyramid, scientists did their best to correct their mistakes by introducing alternative diagrams and guidelines such as MyPlate. This correction would not happen if the original food pyramid was created based off financial incentives.
So this article explains, on a sweltering July day in 2010, 7 medical researchers and 1 patient advocate gathered in a plush Marriott hotel in College Park, Maryland, to review a promising drug designed to prevent heart attacks and strokes by limiting blood clotting.
I'm going to spare you this part. The next part of the video is Lauren reading this article, and she reads very slowly, so it's better if I just summarize this part for all of you. Feel free to check out the original video though if you want the full picture. But basically, it's just an article that details that FDA officials received money from a company for the purposes of travel and advice. In other words, this private company paid FDA officials for advice. Yep, that's it. Advice. Let me explain the FDA approval process a bit, because Lauren, you seem to be unfamiliar. The FDA doesn't just look at the efficacy of the new drug or device you are proposing. That's actually only a small portion of it. They spend a lot of time judging you on things that happen behind the scenes. For example, everything you do in testing the drug, such as clinical trials you run, have to be done in a very rigorous way. You need to have documentation, you need to organize the data correctly, and you need to make sure that the methods follow proper guidelines. The FDA will check, so part of asking for advice from an FDA official will involve a lot of those. If your drug works, then it works. The data will ultimately show it, but proving that it works and the methods of proof is a different story. And the FDA judges more than just the efficacy of the new drug. It's no wonder that some companies would want counseling, because the FDA process is incredibly rigorous. In fact, we even had counseling in my previous work in clinical trials, where we paid someone to counsel us in terms of what the FDA is looking for. And the effort ultimately goes towards things like documentation, how data is collected, how you're collecting data, what's the database you're using, how you are collecting patient consent, things like that. It never goes into the realm of bribery because everyone is aware that you'll ultimately have to go through the checking process regardless of how much money you throw. So from the article you read, that's what I see. I don't see this as paying an FDA official to get your drug automatically approved. That's just not how it works. The pharmaceutical companies themselves wouldn't want to do this either. If they put out a drug and get it approved when in reality it's either useless or harmless, it's going to be retracted quickly. Because guess what? You're not the only one that gathers data for the drug. Everything is peer reviewed, so if your drug is bad, it's going to be caught. Of course, sometimes this can take longer to catch, but it will be caught eventually. Anyway, the point is, your article here proves nothing. The money seems to be clearly going towards advice regarding the methods of drug testing. It's not a way to bypass the FDA judging process.
I'm not saying that this exchange of money definitely constitutes a bribe where these drug companies give these doctors money in order to have approval for drugs that they put forward in the future.
Amazing that you're even willing to admit that, considering how dishonest you've been so far in the video. You're correct. What you're presenting here absolutely does not confirm any sort of bribery. And here's the thing I hate about your claim here. The FDA is responsible for so many regulations that keeps the consumer safe. They don't just regulate drugs and devices, they also regulate the food you eat too. too, making sure that what you consume is not contaminated, for example. They have done so many things that you have never questioned. Every time you put food in your body, it's safe because of the FDA. Every time you take ibuprofen, it's safe because of the FDA. Out of the things they regulate, you just take for granted 99.99% of what they do and approve. But then all of a sudden, when we're talking about COVID, suddenly you're questioning the FDA. Look, the FDA is not perfect. Neither is any organization or any person. I personally even have issue with their approval timing of COVID drugs and vaccines. And yes, sometimes they approve something that is later recalled because of something they didn't catch in the initial process. Mistakes like that happen, and yes, there are lots of ways in which the FDA can improve. But the way you are bringing up invalid criticisms like this is fucking pathetic.